Um, well, hello everyone. My name is Mabel Baez, and I'm with my colleague Farah. Today we're going to be talking about monitoring of dynamic process with applications to environmental management within the Amazon. And really what we're going to be doing today is we're going to synthesize kind of the tools and strategies that are currently employed in monitoring across the Amazon. And then we're going to use that information along with what we learned throughout the workshop to really kind of imagine what the future of monitoring needs to look like in order to be more effective towards environmental management. So just a little brief rundown of how this presentation is going to go. We're going to have a very brief introduction to kind of set the stage. Then we're going to have a very brief summary of the salient points for each presentation. And then we're going to really be focusing our efforts and time on analysis and future pathways. So just to set the stage, we're all here because we care about the Amazon one way or the other, but I always like facts. And so the Amazon takes up 35% of South America, and within the 35%, it has 1/3 to 1/2 of all known biodiversity. That's amazing. And all these biodiversities and ecosystems bring us ecosystem services that are really vital to our survival and our way of life. One of my favorite facts is that the Amazon produces 20% of the oxygen in the world. I think that's pretty important. And also, alongside with this biodiversity, we also have a lot of cultural diversity that is integral towards keeping the Amazon what it is in terms of biodiversity and function. And all these characteristics that are so important and make the Amazon such a unique place are really being threatened by deforestation and degradation that are the results of dynamic socio-ecological processes such as illegal mining, logging, infrastructure development projects, etc. And the way I say these socio-ecological processes is so they kind of feed into each other and create these problems that are very dynamic, that are very context-specific, and that by very nature of these interactions are very hard to monitor and they're very hard to address, as I'm sure we all know. But studies have shown that monitoring is key to really fighting deforestation and degradation and understanding, getting a deeper understanding so that we can actually tackle these issues. So with this idea of how important monitoring is to tackle these problems, there were three driving questions that drove our particular session. The first one was, okay, so what are the current technologies and platforms that enable us to monitor these processes? And the second one is that given how difficult the monitoring processes is, both spatially as well as economically, and how quickly these things change in each area, how can citizen science be part of this solution? And then the last one is, how can data curation lead to more effective environmental governance and monitoring? All right, so very briefly, for the first presentation on multi-scalar data collection tools, some of the bigger take-home points is that we're really seeing very rapid proliferation of amazing technology, remote sensing technology, alongside with storage and processing capability that allows us to really get a deeper understanding of what's happening in multiple scales, because this is these technology can be used in a multi-scalar approach so that you can see deforestation, mining, etc. At a local level, and then you can also take that all the way to a global level. And this really gives us a very holistic picture without losing some of the finer details on the ground. Alongside with this new technology and platforms, we also have increased platforms that allow us more accessibility to this information, and this really makes this technology a lot more usable for people and a lot more relevant, interactive, and yeah. Okay, and so our second presentation was on community monitoring and citizen science. And some of the bigger take-home points from this presentation is that citizen science can be used as a tool for empowering communities and strengthening governance through capacity building and ownership of data. And there's a lot of research that supports this. Also, citizen science can really be used to navigate conflicts between local stakeholders and scientists through increasing transparency and trust throughout the process. Also, citizen science can be a very important tool for valuation and incorporation of local knowledge into the way in which we handle knowledge at the moment. And also that it can really be great for widening the scope of science. And we talk about widening the scope both spatially, how much the space we can cover and get data from, but also temporally, because we have a lot of information from the past. And these are really issues that are really going to be important for local stakeholders, because that's why they want to be invested in this process. And also, it can really be cost effective. Our last presentation was about data challenges and opportunities in the Amazon. And really, one of the biggest points is that data is necessary for informed decision making. However, in the ways in which we handle data right now, data is limited. When we talk about limited, we say that it doesn't exist. Some of the data that we need to make the decisions does not exist, or it's not accessible. Accessibility can be thought of in two different ways. One is the ability of different stakeholders to utilize it. So if you have all these maps but people can't read the maps, that data is not really accessible. And the second one is there's so much data out there, but who has it and where is it and can we access it to really have a more comprehensive look of these problems? Also, as we all know, we're here, right? Data production is expensive, it's extremely time consuming, and it's also challenging. And really what we need to do is streamline our data production, organization, and archiving if we really want data to be able to be used to address these problems and inform management. So if you had to kind of summarize these three presentations together, things are not good, the stuff is okay, and we reiterate the need for more streamlined data gathering, management, and distribution systems.
So putting together all the information from the sessions and from the workshop that was related to monitoring and data collection, we decided, we were thinking about what is working and what need to be expanded. I'm sorry. So in terms of the amount of information of imagery, we have really a lot of information of high temporal resolution imagery, and it's working because it's strengthening the capacity to predict deforestation, and this can be used, for example, in alert system. But it actually can be expanded using or finding strategies to deal with this growing amount of technology, and also to engage in some ways the stakeholders. And other thing that is working is media, the social media, and also media in general, and the use of it for different goals. And for example, the engagement of pop figures, and also having stakeholders as like soap opera characters is like people is like catching these ideas, and they are taking the ideas home. So it has a rapid reaction and make a little bit of social pressure in environmental topics when the media is used. And also in terms of data storage, we know that it's important and really relevant to have the data adequately stored, because it will make it accessible. But we need to increase our ability to store the data, and also to find different place where to put it, like adequate place to store the data. And in terms of collaboration in different scales, like at the local level and regional level, and between institutions and individuals, it's important because it provides a successful way to have a multidisciplinary teams, and also it will save energy, avoiding the replication of efforts. In terms of what are the gaps that we have and how can they be superseded, one important step, like the first one, is defining the adequate questions. So we need to explore what are the people's needs and what are also their beliefs and threats. So in terms of that, we can also validate scientifically their beliefs, and also this is kind of related to citizen science, how to validate the way they do science in the way academic persons do it. And other gap is in terms of the data standardization. So we need to facilitate the process to have a standard kind of data. Not imagine all of us collecting data for our own projects and then putting there in a story, in archiving it in different ways. We need to put it in a standard way that anybody can go and access the data and use it for their own objectives. So we need to be trained in data collection, management, curation, and also in archiving techniques. And in terms of this was a particular topic that was discussed during the session. Is about funding sources and how these institutions or organizations can be key in terms of directing the research that is taking place to fund on, for example, mostly projects that are really related to conservation actions, but also funding sources can be like committed to work with their grantees in terms of compromising them to work in research that will have real products in terms of conservation actions. Other gap was identified as improving the decision-making process. So we should supersede the way the efforts are targeted to have it correctly targeted, and also combining the efforts of different analyses that have the similar core beliefs, again, to avoid replicating efforts. Other gap was the integration of the local knowledge into the decision-making process. So we know that local knowledge can provide a great support for conservation efforts, and also it will bring broader perspective on socio-ecological challenges. But we actually need to train scientists to be able to communicate in an adequate way to different stakeholders, and also to work in community capacity building. And finally, about data ownership, it was identified as a big issue because when we open the access to the data, how can we protect or respect the ownership of the data if everybody can access to it? So we need to find new ways to work or to deal with ownership and open access in general.
So one of the challenges that we had as students for this course was really how we take this suite of information and experiences, not only for our particular part of the workshop, but also the workshop in general in the class, and then how do we reimagine a different future. And so we were looking at all this information through the eyes of theory of change. And what we realized is that one of the key aspects of a theory of change is that it has to be explicit. And when we were looking at the experiences and the way we talk about data management, citizen science, and remote sensing, we realized that this is a very uncomfortable subject, and that there's not really any explicit theory of change used at the moment. And that this is what happens. People are like, what? And there's panic. All right, so then we were challenged with thinking, okay, what is the role of monitoring in a theory of change that leads from data creation to action research that helps with conservation and sustainable development. So follow me, okay? So over here we have monitoring, and really what monitoring does is that it utilizes traditional knowledge, or it should use traditional knowledge, citizen science, and academia, right? Put that together with technology and use the human capital that's there to generate data. And then this is where we break away from our comfort zone. There's a black box right there. We don't really explore that very much. But suddenly, like, we all like to think that leads to decision making and policies and increased conservation and therefore sustainable development. But if we really want to be more effective, and we really want to tackle these very problematic and dynamic threats to the Amazon, we really have to go here. We have to go to the black box. Something else that's really important in the theory of change with monitoring is concerned is both the scale at which it occurs across this idea. So for monitoring, there's really, so if we have remote sensing, if we have citizen science, listener knowledge, you really have all this stuff at the local individual level, and then you can take that, and what you're supposed to do is there's a cumulative effect of this data building that allows us to look at it in multiple scales. And that's what's really amazing, and that's what we're trying to say, or what our goal is by standardizing data collection, etc. Another thing is that when it comes to monitoring and the theory of change, what we really are saying is that the more data we gather, the more involved people are in gathering this data, the more empowerment you have, and that's what's really going to connect these individuals here to decision-making, a place where decision-making can happen in policymakers.
Yeah. So in part of that black box is what we were discussing also with both that people that collect the data on the field, on the ground, and people that have the needs and the environmental problems, etc. They are not actually connected to the higher levels where political decisions and decision making is actually taking place. So how to transfer the information, the needs, and the threats that people is feeling to the people that actually have the power to make the decisions.
Okay. So then we were thinking, okay, so let's go into the black box. And so as Farah was saying, the black box is really where the disconnect between those who have the power to make decisions and those that generate data are, right? And so when we were thinking, okay, so how do we make this black box a little bit more accessible to people? And we thought, you know, the real answer is true, accessible, or one of the answers is true, accessible data. Because we believe that true accessible data in the ways in which we have talked about previously in this presentation can be empowering at a local level and can also on a macro level lead to enforcement. Okay, so now when we talk about empowerment, when we talk about monitoring and data collection and empowerment, we really think that collecting this data, validating this data can lead to a mobilization of local actors. And these data can be used as tool for negotiation for all stakeholders. But it really does a lot for local stakeholders to have these data as tools for negotiation. We believe that when you have true accessible data and monitoring, you really increase accountability because it's far more transparent. And this accountability goes both ways. So local stakeholders can make sure that what they were promised actually is occurring. And then policymakers, after they institute a policy, you can really say, okay, is it actually working? Who is not following these policies? And then there's enforcement through that. And so this true accessible data can lead to enforcement. And this is one of the major ways in which it can help with increased decision conservation and development in the Amazon. Okay, so then we were trying to be thinking out of the box, not the black box, but still out of a box. And so we were thinking, okay, so what tools combines remote sensing, citizen science, and data correction in modernity? And then we talk about it, and it's apps, applications. You know, this technology is fast proliferating across the globe, and so we feel like apps can incorporate scientific knowledge with other forms of knowledge in a platform that can build our collective capacity. And then these are very, can be easily adaptable, can be user-friendly, and can be also very relevant. Of course, in order to do this, we need to think about funding, as well as the infrastructure necessary to just have this sort of technology proliferated. But I don't think that's going to be an issue for much longer, to be honest. Another thing is that we really need to have the theory of change be incorporated into the scientific process at the proposal stage, because otherwise we're always going to be panicking when we think about the theory of change and monitoring, and we're never going to really feel comfortable getting out of that black box. So, thank you.